The past 8 years have seen America pull out of one of the most costly and destructive wars in history, seen diplomacy take precedence over intervention, and human rights flourish in places previously thought impossible. We tell you on Side Opposition today that this was a result of Obama's foreign policy and why it has done far more good than harm. But before I begin my rebuttal, what do we stand for on Side Opposition today? Firstly, we tell you that a president's ability to conduct foreign policy is limited by the Congress which they have had to work with. We tell you that Obama has faced a Congress completely opposed to giving Democrats any political victories at all. What this means is it's not fair for Team Proposition Side Proposition to hold Obama to an unrealistic standard. We think they have to take that into consideration. But secondly, we tell you that presidents don't operate in a vacuum. We think that they inherit a world influenced by their predecessors and strategic commitments that they can't easily undo. We think, in other words, we ask you to remember the world that Obama inherited, and we see that on Side Opposition, that world is substantially better today than it was 8 years ago. A couple questions of rebuttal. Firstly, in sort of like whether or not USA is takes the role of a policeman, or whether they should be responsible for international relations, and secondly, this whole idea of foreign intervention versus diplomacy. On the first, we tell you in opposition, we're okay with conceding the first 2 minutes of Team Opposition speech. We do think that the USA does recognize its role in the world and that takes the primary responsibility. We're happy with them doing so, right? But secondly, we also tell you that it's important, and we think that Obama has recognized this, for there to be a global community who equally takes part in a role into solving international conflicts. I think that's exactly what Obama has been doing for the past 8 years, when he works with other nations in terms of fighting Syria, fighting ISIS, but in extension, the sort of talks around is him recognizing that this can't be America acting alone, and it's in the world's best interest if multiple powers work together. We need to also recognize why that's been a good thing. But secondly, on this whole idea of foreign intervention, which they tell us is so good, and why diplomacy is so terrible. So firstly, we tell you that diplomacy, in many, many instances, is far better than the sort of foreign intervention that they tell us they want. We think simply because of the fact it saves more lives. We think when you decide just constantly to just send in troops places, we think that far more people die. We think the sort of instances they tell us about why Iraq was so harmful is because of the fact that the US intervened militarily. We tell you that on our side, Obama recognized this and was just able to do implement a lot more diplomacy. We tell you that's a good thing. But secondly, they never told us, with examples, why the diplomacy that Obama had engaged in was so harmful, right? We tell you that firstly, it's been very effective. We point to sanctions they implemented against Russia. We talked to the negotiations they had with Cuba. We tell you these are all sorts of diplomacy that Obama has had on our side of the house that have led to far more good in the world. Secondly, on this whole discussion they had about Iraq, right, and how they told us there's currently a power vacuum. Firstly, and we think it's really important to note here, is that the situation in Iraq was something that Obama inherited. We tell you that Obama was not the one who intervened in Iraq in the first place, and he simply had to deal with the consequences of the president before him. But secondly, and we think this is very important, is that given this situation, he did the best thing he could. That's to say that the war in Iraq was unpopular and expensive. We tell you that the American people didn't want to be engaged in that war. We tell you that secondly, American troops were dying by being there. And thirdly, and most importantly, if they want to talk about ISIS, they need to recognize but by having the American military in these countries, it was perpetuating sort of radicalization that led to these extremist groups in the first place. We tell you Obama realized that and was therefore able to take them out. We tell you that that was a good thing. But also, we think it's important to know that all the stuff they told us about Iraq and how they prefer negotiations, right, is actually what's happening at the moment. We tell you Obama is actually trying to create peace and stability in the nation. Moving on to my substantive today about why we think that there are 3 core elements of any successful American foreign policy. I'm going to be discussing the first 2. That is, firstly, how he's reduced the likelihood of a global conflict, and secondly, how Obama has increased the protections of human rights. My second speaker, Mohammed, is going to be talking about how he secured American interests. On to my first argument about why Obama has reduced the likelihood of a global conflict. We tell you importantly that global conflicts do a huge amount of damage on a scale that is very hard to imagine. Why is this? We tell you that such conflicts kill hundreds of thousands of people and they destroy infrastructure and deny people significant rights. I'll take you in a minute. We tell you that to the extent that Obama's foreign policy has reduced both the likelihood and the scale of global conflict, it has done an incredible good. We think Obama has reduced the likelihood of a global conflict in 3 ways. Firstly, de-escalated conflicts. Secondly, created multinational institutions. And thirdly, convinced disarmament. But before I explain how these things happened, yes.
Given that the incidents in Iraq have clearly resulted in loss of human rights for the people that live there, and the US is responsible for these people, how can you then say that human rights have improved under the Obama administration?
Okay, so firstly, my substantive, I'm going to be telling you why separately rights have improved for other people, particularly like people from LGBT communities around the world. We think Obama has safeguarded them. But secondly, you need to deal with the fact that Obama was not the one who intervened in Iraq in the first place. We know that he did the best thing that possibly could, which is engage in negotiations and take American troops out, which is that protected far more rights. You need to deal with that. On this first idea about how he's de-escalated conflicts, we tell you that firstly in Ukraine, in response to the annexation of the Crimea, we think the US imposed economic sanctions. We tell you that in terms of Iraq, Obama recognized he had to withdraw. We think that this de-escalation of the conflict reduced the exacerbation of radicalization, things I've already talked about. Secondly, we tell you that he created multinational institutions for conflict resolution. We think that rather than relying on military threats made by military powers like the USA, global peace is becoming guaranteed by international alliances. We think this is because Obama recognized and reasserted diplomacy as a means of conflict resolution. We think he removed the need for military forces to solve a range of international disputes. We point to the example of Iran and the negotiations that happened there and the framework. We tell you that the coordination of international action was one of the biggest sources at ending the sort of a main point of conflict in the Middle East. Thirdly, we tell you that he convinced the world to disarm itself. We think Obama has stopped Iran's development of nuclear weapons and convinced Russia to reduce its stockpile of loose weapons. Why is this so important, and why does it mean that Obama, as foreign policy, has done far more good than harm? We tell you that a greater number of weapons and there is an increased likelihood that one of them is likely to use those weapons either intentionally or accidentally. We tell you such an attack would invite nuclear responses from countries such as China and the USA, or alternatively, military reprisals from places like Israel. We think at best, we think that what happens was Obama was able to reduce the likelihood of a global conflict, and we think that this is so crucial in terms of him disarming other nations. Secondly, we tell you that Obama has protected human rights. We tell you that nations have obligations to citizens that are not only in their country as well. Why is this? We think for the same reason that we punish people, we don't allow people to kill others who have a different nationality. I think Obama recognized that it was important to protect others around the world. We think that firstly, we think that Obama largely ended the worst systematic human rights abuses perpetrated by the US in the name of combating terrorism. We tell you that the Bush administration policies of rendition, torture, and indefinite detention were needlessly abusive and inflicted suffering on thousands, many of whom were wholly innocent. We think that these measures also inspired a wave of anti-American terrorism by fueling the rhetoric of groups like ISIS. We tell you that Obama has taken steps to end such abuses, to end such things like torture in Guantanamo Bay, which I think that's an incredibly positive thing. But secondly, we tell you that when it's politically feasible, he has acted to end mass genocide. We point to the example of Libya, when Gaddafi said that he was going to try and kill systematically all opposition of civilians in his country. We tell you that Obama recognized it was wanting to step in and help those people. But we also tell you in terms of serious chemical weapons, Obama negotiated the removal of such chemical weapons and thus saved thousands of lives. Ladies and gentlemen, because of the fact that Obama has not only protected rights around the world, but has also domestically secured American interests, we beg you to oppose.